It started with a single bark from the back of the ferry. Seconds later, every passenger was staring overboard, frozen in place. But no one expected what was drifting just beneath the surface. How did it get there, and who put it there? Here's the full story, but before we jump in, comment your favorite dog's name and tap that subscribe button. The ferry rocked gently as it pulled away from the dock in Bremerton, Washington. The cold morning air rolled across the deck like a silent wave, soaking into boots, jackets, and unspoken thoughts. It was just past 6:40 a.m., a routine commuter run bound for Seattle, and the Puget Sound glistened under overcast skies. Officer David Mercer leaned against the guardrail on the lower deck, his eyes scanning the waterline out of habit more than concern. He had made this trip hundreds of times before, assigned to accompany his K-9 partner for random sweeps on board the early ferries. Most days were quiet, at worst a forgotten bag or someone dodging fares. But this morning had felt different the moment he woke up. Not because of the weather, not even because of the passengers, because of Finn. Finn was a 5-year-old K-9, a dark sable German shepherd with steel-gray eyes and the kind of discipline that made handlers proud and other dogs jealous. He had never once broken routine, never once barked without cause. But as soon as the ferry's engines had kicked into motion and the shoreline started drifting away, Finn had changed. At first it was subtle. His head turned sharply toward the starboard side. His ears perked and stayed fixed. His breathing shallowed. Then he moved closer to the ferry's railing, nose lifting slightly into the air. David had noticed. He always noticed. Still, he chalked it up to curiosity until Finn growled, low, deep, controlled. David followed his gaze to the water, but all he could see were ripples. Then came the bark. One sharp, sudden bark that startled nearby passengers and silenced the small chatter happening around the open-air deck. A few turned, surprised. Most assumed it was nothing, but Finn didn't stop. He pulled hard against the leash, his eyes locked on something beyond the ferry's railing. David tightened his grip and stepped forward to calm the dog, but then he saw it too. Floating just a few yards away from the moving ferry was something that didn't belong. It looked like driftwood at first, long, dark, partially submerged. But it wasn't drifting with the current. It was still, too still. Then it shifted slightly, enough for the edge of a dark green fabric to break the surface. Passengers began noticing. A man leaned over the rail with a confused expression. A mother covered her child's eyes. One of the deck crew stepped back slowly and reached for his radio. Finn kept barking, relentlessly now. David's instincts kicked in. He pulled his radio from his chest and called it in. "This is Mercer, K-9 unit on board the 0640 Bremerton ferry. We've got a possible body in the water, human-sized, about 30 yards off starboard." The voice on the other end was calm. "Copy that. Alerting Coast Guard and Bremerton PD. Stand by." The ferry slowed. A murmur spread through the crowd. A deckhand moved toward the captain's cabin. One of the engineers came out with binoculars and looked through them briefly, then nodded grimly. It was definitely a person, and not moving. By the time the ferry reached a holding position, a Coast Guard vessel had already been rerouted. The crew moved with calm precision, hauling the body carefully from the water with a stretcher harness. It was a man mid-30s, thin build, fully clothed and waterlogged. He wore a military-style jacket, boots, and gloves. No wallet, no ID. But something about the jacket, specifically the patch, stood out immediately to David. It wasn't from any branch of the U.S. military. It was foreign. Finn remained tense even after the man was removed from the water. His nose turned back toward the railing as if something else still lingered. David glanced around, scanning the ferry. That's when he noticed it. A small metal container wedged against the ferry's lower stern, half tucked beneath a life ring housing. The current must have pulled it into place while no one was looking. It was dented, metallic, about the size of a small duffel, and Finn was growling at it now, not barking, not pacing, just growling like he had when he first sensed something off. David moved closer, cautiously. He called it in again, this time with added urgency. Possible suspicious package found attached to the lower stern, advised bomb squad on arrival. As authorities arrived and sealed off the ferry, passengers were escorted off slowly. Statements were taken. Photos of the man from the water were matched against databases, but nothing came up. The package, not a bomb, but not innocent either. Inside were 2 military-style hard drives sealed in watertight plastic, along with a handwritten note in Cyrillic script. It took hours before a translator confirmed the message. Short, direct, and chilling. This is only the first. David sat in the ferry's crew office as the investigation expanded beyond anything he had ever been a part of. Federal agents were now involved. Surveillance footage was pulled from every dock camera, ferry port, and even the parking lots leading into the ferry terminal, and yet, nothing showed the man boarding. No one matching his face was seen on any footage. No witness could place him on deck. It was as if he had appeared from the water itself. Later that night, David took Finn for a walk along the pier. The sky was clear now, stars reflected in the black water. Most of the law enforcement teams had gone home for the evening. The ferry had been grounded until further notice. But Finn wasn't relaxed. He stood near the edge of the dock and let out one low growl, then sat, facing the open water. David looked out too, nothing. But somehow it felt like something wasn't finished. Not yet. The following morning, the ferry remained docked, roped off, monitored by both local police and a quiet federal presence. Yellow tape swayed gently in the breeze like warning flags, but it was the emptiness of the deck that felt most unnatural. No coffee cups left behind, no boot scuffs, no ferry workers checking schedules, just silence, and that lingering unease that something had slipped through. Officer David Mercer hadn't slept much. Neither had Finn. At 6 a.m., they were both back at the Bremerton terminal. David had requested access to the ferry again, not for official protocol, but because Finn wouldn't calm down. Every time David tried to walk him anywhere else, the dog pulled toward the water. His body would tense, his tail lower, his ears shift slightly back. It was a signal David knew well. Something still wasn't right. By 6:30, they were on board again. The federal team had granted David permission after reviewing his record and Finn's past alerts. The two had uncovered narcotics buried 6 feet beneath a warehouse floor once, and Finn had tracked a missing child for 9 hours straight through dense woodlands without losing focus. If Finn was saying there was more, they listened. The deck still smelled like salt and diesel. But Finn ignored the air. He walked with his nose low, body controlled, moving in quick bursts from one section to the next. Then he paused. At the rear stairwell leading to the maintenance access corridor, David unlocked the latch. The stairwell creaked as they descended. Below, where crew usually checked engines and emergency power, the corridor was silent. David turned on his flashlight. Finn was ahead of him now, nose pressed to a seam in the metal wall. He sniffed, backed up, barked twice, then sat. Another signal. David leaned in. The panel looked normal, but something was off. Barely visible screws along the base had been turned slightly. He knelt, unscrewed the fasteners, and gently pulled back the panel. Inside was a narrow storage cavity, empty, except for a single USB flash drive and a torn strip of blue canvas fabric. No label, no markings, but the blue material looked eerily similar to the outer lining of Coast Guard gear bags. David radioed it in. Tech team arrived within the hour. They took the flash drive and began reviewing its contents in the ferry's makeshift command room. It didn't take long. The drive was full of location metadata, satellite imagery, zoomed-in snapshots of ferry routes, patrol boat schedules, and something else. Structural layouts of the docks and ferry loading terminals in Seattle and Bainbridge Island. These were not public files. Some were marked confidential. This wasn't just an abandoned hiding spot. It had been a drop site. Later that day, David was called into a side office by one of the federal analysts. "You've seen this man before," the agent said, placing a black and white surveillance still on the table. It was a shot of the deceased man recovered from the water, but the background wasn't water. It was a terminal, Seattle, from 2 weeks ago. He had boarded a different ferry alone. No return footage. Another image showed him leaving something in a benchside locker. That locker had since been emptied. There were now 3 known drop locations across different terminals, all connected to a larger grid. Each matched a corresponding timestamp on the USB drive, and every one of those moments occurred precisely at 6:43 a.m., the same time Finn had started barking. The numbers weren't random, they were messages, checkpoints, and whoever had designed the pattern had been watching from the water. Around 3 p.m., David got a call from a harbor patrol diver who had been asked to sweep the underwater area near where the body had been pulled up. They had found something else, a GoPro, strapped to the underside of a submerged buoy, still functional. When the footage was extracted and reviewed, it showed the surface of the ferry passing directly overhead, followed by a few minutes of static, then a hand appearing in frame, reaching toward the buoy. It was the man from the water. But more chilling was the fact that someone else appeared in the corner of the footage wearing dark diving gear, only visible for a split second. There had been 2 people, only one body had surfaced, and neither had boarded the ferry through normal channels. That evening, as officers combed through past logs of ferry departures and arrivals, another strange detail emerged. A woman, a federal subcontractor named Leah Miles, had been scheduled to return on the same ferry 3 days prior but had never scanned her pass leaving the terminal. Her belongings were found in her car parked nearby. Her phone pinged near the dock at 6:42 a.m., the same minute. There had been no missing person report filed. She lived alone, had no immediate family. It was possible, the federal agent said, that she had simply walked away. But David doubted that, so did Finn. The dog had been pacing ever since they came off the ferry. Now he stood near the edge of the lower deck where the ferry met the docking gate. Nose tilted, body frozen. He barked once, then again. David turned. There, behind the gate, tucked near the base of a heavy bollard, was a flash of color, blue canvas. He climbed down, brushing past warning signs and scraped steel. The light from his flashlight landed on a bundle of fabric. It was another Coast Guard-style gear bag. Inside were wet clothes, a key card, and a second torn photo, this one showing the inside of a ferry engine room. And scribbled in pencil on the edge of the photo were 2 words, "Next time." It had been nearly 36 hours since Finn first barked on the ferry. The media had caught wind, but officials were tight-lipped. The public was told it was a training sweep, nothing to worry about. But David knew better. There were now more pieces than answers. 2 bags, 1 dead man, 1 missing woman, 1 set of encrypted ferry maps, and somewhere beneath it all, a message that kept surfacing like the tide. This is only the first. Finn rested that night beside David's desk, eyes open facing the door. He hadn't let his guard down once. Neither had David, because whatever was coming next, it had already started moving, and Finn somehow already knew where to listen. By sunrise on the 3rd day, the ferry remained docked under restricted access. Most of the public assumed it was a mechanical issue. Only a handful of people knew the truth. What began with a bark had become something far more complex, a layered chain of planted messages, missing persons, and now evidence that more was still waiting to be found. Finn was restless. He paced the length of the pier beside Officer David Mercer, occasionally glancing at the ferry as if still waiting for something to surface. David reviewed the last remaining pieces they had, a flash drive full of confidential ferry schematics, surveillance photos showing local targets, GPS data pointing to locations around Puget Sound, and a dead man who'd seemingly emerged from nowhere. And then there was Leah Miles, the federal subcontractor who had vanished near the terminal with her keycard, found tucked beneath a bollard in a bag identical to the first. But there was one thing left unanswered, why all of it had led back to the ferry, and why Finn wasn't finished barking. That morning, a decision was made. The ferry was to be dry docked and cleared from the water for inspection, but Finn made his move first. While walking along the lower boarding ramp, Finn suddenly lunged. His front paws hit the edge of a metal lip that led to a narrow crawl space beneath the loading platform, one that sat just above the waterline. He barked with such force David lost grip of the leash for a second. Finn dove beneath the platform, disappearing out of view. David followed, crouching down as metal scraped under his boots. The space was tight, cluttered with old rope coils, chains, and salt-rusted bolts. It smelled like seawater and oil. Then Finn barked again. This time it echoed off the steel like a warning bell. David's flashlight flicked across the space and froze. There, attached with magnets under the ferry's stern, was a sealed plastic case, smaller than the last, black, waterproof, worn. David radioed it in, his voice flat but firm. Suspicious device located beneath loading platform, no wires, no visible explosives, requesting immediate extraction team. The bomb squad responded within 15 minutes. Inside the box they found no bomb, just a phone, and a single sheet of laminated paper with typed text in bold. Phase 3 will not wait. On the phone were only 2 videos, both time-stamped less than 12 hours earlier. The first video showed the missing subcontractor, Leah Miles, bound, gagged, but alive. She was seated in a dim metal room, hands zip-tied to a chair. In the background was a voice, distorted, unreadable, but the tone made the message clear. This is not just a threat. The second video showed a set of explosives placed in a narrow tunnel, a signal light blinking red. The coordinates embedded in the video's metadata pointed to an abandoned access tunnel buried beneath a marina pier just outside the neighboring town of Port Orchard, less than 20 minutes by boat. Authorities scrambled. Marine patrol units were dispatched. An FBI task force joined the operation. But David and Finn were given a different assignment, quiet and off-record, because the investigators were beginning to understand something. Finn had already known where to look. He had followed no digital leads, no databases, just scent, behavior, instinct. So when David suggested he and Finn check the marina on foot while the FBI worked the tunnel, no one argued. They arrived by unmarked vehicle just after noon. The marina was eerily quiet. Cloud cover sat heavy and the docks creaked under the weight of gentle waves. Finn stepped out and immediately turned right toward an older storage building that hadn't been used in years. David followed, hand at his sidearm, flashlight ready. Halfway down the dock, Finn stopped. His body locked, his tail low, his breathing slow and deliberate. Then he moved, quickly, toward the side of the boathouse. There was a door. It wasn't locked. Inside, empty shelves, mildew-covered floorboards, and salt-stained walls. But then David saw the boot prints. Fresh. Finn sniffed once, then barked again. Behind a stack of canvas tarps, a trapdoor was built into the floor. Beneath it, a spiral stairwell descended into a subchamber, possibly an old pump room from when the marina had serviced large freight boats. The room below smelled like rust and electricity. In the corner was Leah Miles, alive, barely conscious, but breathing. As David rushed in, Finn stayed planted at the entrance, facing the opposite wall, growling. David turned. Another man emerged from the shadows. No uniform, just dark clothes, a tool belt, and something in his hand. But before he could lift it, Finn leapt. The struggle was brief. The man hit the wall, hard. The object in his hand, a detonator, clattered to the ground. David secured him. Within minutes, backup arrived. The explosive devices found in the tunnel had been real, but incomplete. This had been the final step, a live threat, a final witness, and without Finn's alert, without his final bark, it would have gone unnoticed. In the days that followed, the investigation unraveled layers of conspiracy tied to a ring of foreign operatives using regional ferry routes to plant surveillance devices and build routes for illegal data drops. Leah Miles had unknowingly intercepted a file months ago during an equipment calibration project and had been marked for removal. Her disappearance was timed to coincide with the ferry incident, a distraction meant to split law enforcement's attention. The man in the water? A courier. Disposable. The bags? Messages? And the ferry? Just the beginning. A week later, the ferry was cleared for public use again. David and Finn walked the length of the top deck before anyone else boarded. The wind blew strong that morning, pulling the clouds apart in long ribbons of light. David paused by the starboard rail, the same place Finn had barked that first morning. The water shimmered below. Finn stood beside him, still, calm, watchful. No barking today, just quiet understanding. David knelt, placing a hand on the canine's back. "You found them all, boy," he whispered. Finn's ears twitched slightly. Then finally the dog sat down, eyes on the horizon. If you like these kind of stories, trust me, what's coming next will leave you speechless. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and like the video so you don't miss a single moment. We've got more stories where heroes walk on four legs. Stay close, it's about to get even better.